Hi, my name is Dr. Brian Dowling, a veterinarian in Elma, Washington. I'm going to be demonstrating a home-built or shop-built pressure-regulated, non-rebreathing ventilator system. It can be deployed anywhere in the world. All it needs to run it is a source of oxygen and a person to work the lever. I'll go through the parts here and kind of demonstrate what's actually going on. The oxygen concentrator here is providing oxygen through this little tube into the system. This represents the patient here. That's their lungs essentially. They're attached to a standard set of plumbing for ventilator use. The oxygen enters here, enters the system. It then takes its pressure from this gadget over here. It's got a pressure regulator, which is essentially a column of water. And depending on where these tubes are in the depth of the water, that determines the amount of pressure in the system. Right now, it's running at a residual pressure of about 2 centimeters of water. That peak or partial end expiratory pressure can be adjusted by simply moving this tube up and down in the water column. I just pushed it down a little bit, and the water column is exerting more pressure here, so the whole system gets pressurized to another couple of centimeters of water pressure, and that's the end expiratory pressure. Now as you push this lever forward, there's another breathing bag in this box, and as you push this forward, the paddle pressurizes that, and it goes up to the point where this other tube is deep enough that when the air goes out the end of the tube and you hear the bubbles, that means it's got 40 centimeters of water pressure. And as you can see, as you move it back and forth, the bag inflates and deflates as the pressure increases and decreases. You really can't go over the preset pressure. The pressure, the peak pressure can easily be adjusted by simply moving this tube up and down inside the bag of water. So this is a slightly lower pressure. If you push too hard, you can throw the water out the top of the tube, but that's an easy enough thing to avoid doing. The various parts, this one has a manometer on it, but mostly that's just for the prototype, so I can keep track of what the pressures are. You can easily directly read the pressure that's at any given point by the water level in this little clear tube inside the water column. The handle is removable. It's basically just a stick. It does pinch this tubing as it goes across here. I'll show that a little more detail later, but what it does is it closes off the low pressure tube and makes all the pressure go to the high pressure end of the system. Otherwise it just blasts out the low pressure side and it doesn't build up the pressure that you want. Essentially, to work it, it's fairly mind-numbingly boring, but a good job for a medical student who needs some character building. You basically just sit in this chair, and however fast your respiratory rate is, you simply just push it forward until some bubbles come out the other end of the tube. And that's one respiration. So now we can go into some more details about the various parts and how to build them. So basically, it's a pressure-regulated ventilator, which is operated and powered by a human being, which there are plenty of in the world at the moment. Not so many full-feature ventilators at the moment. So it's basically better than nothing. It's not a full-feature ventilator by any means, but it's like I say, deployable anywhere in the world. The parts are essentially locally available. You don't even have to ship anything. It can be put together in, I could probably make 10 of these in a day all by myself. So it's very low tech, but effective. It delivers the pressures that you want when you want them. It's a non-rebreathing system, so it does take a fairly good flow of oxygen through this tube to make sure that they're not rebreathing the same air that they just exhale. A couple of nice features. This tube, standard medical grade stuff, available in any hospital. This This tube can be a very far distance. This gadget can be in the next room. It doesn't have to be in the same room with the patient, which is very nice. And one person could pretty easily power 3 or even 4 of these things, because all you have to do is push the laser forward as often as you want to respire the patient. So, like I said, it's a good character builder for medical students and nursing students. Ideally, someone who's already been exposed to the virus and recovered, so you don't have to worry about exposure. So I'll get a little more close-up stuff going here, and we can show you the individual parts. This is the water column pressure regulator. It can be pretty much anything. These clear cylinders are very nice for this because you can see inside them quite well. You can use an opaque tube, but it is a little harder to tell what's going on. So if you can do transparent, it's much nicer. I put a little food coloring in here so you can see the water level a little better. I've got a gauge marked out in centimeters of height with 0 at the water level. These 2 tubes, this one is the low pressure tube. It stops at about 3 centimeters of water. And like I say, that's adjustable if you want. This is the amount of pressure you get for end expiratory pressure. The other longer tube is the peak pressure for inhalation, and again it's adjustable by simply sliding it up and down in the water column. You could use a bucket, just about any water container where you can actually tell the depth of these 2 tubes is fine. I would put a little chlorine or something in the water because it's going to be sitting for a while and you don't want things growing in there. The tubing is again not real critical. This is just vinyl tubing from the hardware store. The other more complete prototype has just a food vacuum bag for freezer bag. It's a nice tough plastic, comes in rolls of any length. So if you wanted to make this thing high enough to do 50 centimeters of water pressure, you could make a taller tube. So it's quite flexible. The important things are that it's just a water column. It's very simple, easy to adjust. So this is one of the more critical parts of the whole apparatus. You can see this tube right here. That's the low pressure tube that's only just barely submerged in the water, maintaining the low pressure in the system. It's a flexible, this is silicone, which is very nice for this. You can use any other flexible tubing as long as it is resilient enough to spring back. What it does is it goes across this point where the handle pushes, and as you can see, as the handle goes this way, it closes off this section of the system so that you can now produce higher pressures in the other end. So as you push this forward, it closes it during the inhalation cycle so you can reach the high pressure end of the system. It's fairly straightforward. You just need to have it running across here and with the handle with enough flexibility to close the tube as you push it forward. This just happens to be a piece of dowel. Anything will pretty much do as long as it fits in such a way that it can rock back and forth, making that closing motion as you go that way. Other parts of the system. So this is a view down inside the box. This is the completely loose paddle that's the actuator. We'll get that out of the way. If you look inside there, this side of the box is slanted so that it makes a kind of a V at the bottom, which means that this can't really move around much in the bottom. So it makes essentially a loose hinge. That's a breather bag, standard anesthetic equipment. That's a 3-liter bag. This little manifold here is made out of a 3/4 inch CPVC pipe, which serendipitously happens to fit precisely inside this standard tubing, 1 inch inside diameter. The CPVC is the only one that actually fits that diameter. If you get regular PVC, it won't fit. The manifold is basically made by simply drilling 2 holes to fit the two tubes. Again, this one's silicone, which is very nice for this. This one is much more readily available, just vinyl tubing, and it's not really moving. The silicone one does move, so it's because it does attach back to the paddle here. So the air comes out of here, through that little valve section which closes off, and this is the low pressure arm. This just goes off to the manometer, so it doesn't even have to be there. The high pressure side of the system comes out of the manifold right here, and then goes into the bag with its end down at whatever depth you want to make the high pressure part of the cycle. This is a little close-up of the manometer, showing a little quirk that you kind of need to be aware of. Now when I pressurize this, you'll see the water level in these tubes change. This is the low pressure tube, this is the high pressure tube. Now air is going to be coming out of the low pressure tube, and you want to make note of the water level in the other tube. It's more stable and easier to keep track of. You'll notice that they're not exactly the same. This one's at about 4 centimeters of water, and this one, when it's bubbling out the end, is at about 5 centimeters of water. This is the more accurate gauge. The bubbling and the resistance in the low pressure side of the system will cause a slight mismatch between the actual pressure and the pressure that you're actually having in the system. You'll notice that when the airflow is higher, the mismatch gets bigger. It's more accurate when it's not flowing quite as fast. Now when you close the tubing, which I'll do with my fingers here, you'll notice that it quits bubbling, and then the pressure in the high pressure side can get higher, and that water level will drop inside that tube. Until it eventually comes out the other end at the peak pressure. So it's just a little close-up of the tube. And this is that freezer bag tube. Makes a real handy, transparent water column. It's a little pain in the neck to keep track of. It's floppy, so you got to support it. And you see it's actually hanging from the top of this board. Keeps it stable. The box is very simple to put together, nothing fancy. 5 planks that are 7 inches by 16 inches. This happens to be 1/2-inch marine grade plywood, but it doesn't really matter. 1 larger piece to make the paddle. It's longer but narrower so that it fits into this little V that's made here. You can see I'm showing the inside attachments of these planks, and you see this one's coming in at an angle with about an inch gap at the bottom for this to rest in. It does need to be tall enough to have this pinch hinge apparatus clear the top so you can get the full distance throw with this paddle, and then the attachment for the handle doesn't have to be anything special either. The bag is attached on the inside. I just put a zip tie around this manifold. The 3/4 inch CPVC manifold is just zip tied to the side so that it doesn't move. Again, nothing special. So this is a tutorial on basically if you're the poor schmuck who actually has to run this thing. It's going to be boring, no fun at all. Basically you're just pushing this lever back and forth in a somewhat controlled manner for long periods of time. A couple of things you would need to bear in mind is you want to keep track of the partial end expiratory pressure. Should be about whatever the doctor has chosen. This is set at about 5 centimeters of water, and you can see that level right there. As you push this forward, you notice this bubbler stops because it's no longer connected to the system because we pinched this off. So now you're producing the high pressure, which you'll see this water level go down to the end. When it hits the end, the pressure quits going up because the pressure is being released at that level. Do not push it super hard, because if you push a huge amount of air out the other end, you're not going to increase the pressure to the patient, but you will blow the water out of this tube if you're not careful. And there's really no reason to push it hard. Once it starts coming out that end, you've reached the pressure that you need. And depending on the compliance of the patient's lungs, that could be a very short throw or a rather long throw. You hope for a long throw because that means the patient's lungs are compliant. If they're really rigid, you'll hit that high pressure rather quickly without much actual change in the volume. That's kind of a bad sign. So, yeah, that's basically things to keep on a lookout for. Check the water pressure levels, the water column height, that type of thing, and basically try to figure out some way to accurately time these pushes. It doesn't take any strength, and like I said, you could conceivably run 2, 3, or 4 of these things depending on the respiratory rates that you're trying to do. This is obviously too fast, but a little character building. Obviously, I realize this is not a modern mechanical, automatic, computer-controlled ventilator. It is, however, better than nothing. It's ugly, it's makeshift, but it does deliver reproducible, accurate pressures, and requires no technology whatsoever. Easily deployable, virtually disposable. It's so inexpensive to make. So it's, like I said, it's ugly, but might change your mind if you're on that list of people who isn't deemed worthy of a ventilator, and you actually need one, and there just aren't any available. So something to think about. If you want to make changes to it, as long as it puts out the pressures accurately and delivers enough oxygen, it's better than nothing. I'm not patenting this. It's free to use any way you want to distribute it. It matters not to me. So, well, good luck.